Hello and welcome to another episode of the Trash Talk Podcast. I'm your gentleman, Smokey Rameriz from the Trash Talk. How you doing?
Doing good, man. Over here in the USA, down in the southeast, it is actually kind of cooler because we have to give the obligatory weather report. It has gotten much cooler. I think it was like a high of maybe 80 degrees in freedom units yesterday. But I hear we're going back up to almost 100 next week. So it's going to suck. But for right now, it's great. How's the weather in Germany?
Similar. Not 80, but 25 degrees, whatever that is. And it's been, the point is it's been about 5 degrees colder than it was when we were, 5 to 10 degrees colder than it was when we were peaking, which I think is about 10 to 20 degrees colder in Fahrenheit than it was whenever we were, because we did have highs of like over 35 ever so slightly, but most hot days were more around 30, and last couple of days we've been more around 20 to 25 again, so that is much more comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bother to look up the conversion right now, but yeah, that's the weather report.
Yeah, I know. Freedom units to non-freedom units. But yeah, it's much more tolerable right now. For sure.
I will say this is not the topic, but I do think, especially for temperature, I do prefer metric quite a bit. Actually, is it technically metric? Because I think metric would be Kelvin. But yeah, I prefer Celsius over Fahrenheit quite a bit because...
Apparently, the whole world does, except for us.
I mean, the argument for it, at the end of the day, it probably comes down to what you're used to, but the argument for it is, 0 is freezing, 100 is boiling.
Yeah.
Like, that's perfect. Yeah. It's a nice
everything's in nice, even, round numbers, but for some reason, whoever invented American units, I guess it was a culmination of several different people, we just take these odd numbers and go, okay, boiling is 212, freezing is 32. Like, why?
I have a strong suspicion who came up with your temperature scale. That would probably be Fahrenheit. Because there was a scientist called Fahrenheit. I don't remember his first name, but yeah, I'm saying after him. You might not have come up with it personally, but
like Kelvin and Celsius.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about Celsius, but I'm pretty sure it's also one. Fahrenheit, a temperature scale based on one proposed by European physicist Daniel Gabriel Fahrenheit. Yep.
Oh, there you go. Wait, you said European physicist?
Yeah, he was born in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in Gdansk, or back then Danzig, which also used to be part of Germany at one point, I believe. And he died in Den Haag, in the Netherlands. So, yeah.
So how did we come to adopt a European physicist scale?
Yeah, he's literally German Polish. Like
that's your people, man.
Yeah. So Celsius. One of 2 temperature scales used in the International System of Units. Oh, Celsius and Kelvin are both SI units. Okay, I didn't know that. It is named after the Swedish astronomer Anders Celsius, who proposed the first version of it. Okay, so the unit was called centigrade in several languages. Yes, the Brits still call it sometimes. Anyways, not the point. We're talking about something much less controversial than preferred temperature systems today. We're going to talk about politics.
Yeah. Very less controversial.
Much more straightforward, universal agreement.
Not divisive.
Specifically, we're going to talk about third-party candidates. Pros, cons, why not, what even is a third party. There's a lot of things to talk about here. And since you're the American here, I guess I'll give you the first word on third-party candidates, because it's a very American concept at the end of the day.
Yeah. I have actually voted for third-party presidents and politicians in general, whichever ones I've decided to vote on, more than once, as a matter of fact. I voted for Gary Johnson. I think there's only been 2, at least those are the top 2, in the 90s, or was it? Yeah, I guess it was in the 90s, because it was when Bill Clinton became president. There was a candidate named Ross Perot. He was an independent. And he gained traction by going on and buying infomercial time and exposing the IRS to the people. And he gained traction in the polls that way and actually became very viable. And a lot of people blame him for the reason Bush was not elected for his second term, because usually, in general, unless something drastic happens, the incumbent is going to win the presidency. Once again, it's rare that it doesn't happen unless there's criminal activity, or a third party president steps in, or a third party candidate steps in. And Ross Perot was actually one of those people they blame for taking the presidency away from Bush and handing it over to Clinton, because he kind of split the right wing votes for George Bush. And then like I said, the other one was Gary Johnson in 2016. Because the only reason he gained any traction at all was because at that point in time, there were two of the most hated candidates to ever run against each other, in Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And I know Trump has become a beloved figure over time to a certain portion, and a hated figure. That is extremely polarizing. Extremely polarizing, because you have the people who worship him, and then you have the people who just hate that he exists. It's not like it was back then. Like, he was more, I guess there was more unification in the dislike of Donald Trump back there in those days. Even the Republicans were like, we're not all for this guy. And that's how Gary Johnson, as a third party candidate, made some traction. But of course, it wasn't enough, because we live by this sentiment here in America that if you don't vote for the left or the right, you are wasting your vote. That's the motto of a lot of people. And that's why a third party candidate will never win the presidency. But how does that go in Germany?
The presidency, you see, is okay. Let's not get into the German president. That's a whole can of worms. But the chancellor is effectively elected by the Bundestag, similar to the Speaker of the House for you, or the Prime Minister for the Brits. And we elect the Bundestag directly in a slightly convoluted system, but essentially it's proportional representation. So you do also have local candidates, but they don't really matter in any practical sense, because the proportionality of what is considered the second vote, the party vote, is actually what determines the composition of the Bundestag. So we vote on a proportional system. So you vote for a party, and the party gets seats proportionate to how many votes they got. So if a party gets 20% of the vote, they get 20% of the seats, or in practice, actually, because of the 5% hurdle, slightly more probably. They get probably more like 22% of the vote, but that's besides the point. Of the seats, rather. And then you have coalition building, where unless a party gets more than 50% of the seats, they can't really effectively govern. So generally, you will get multiple parties coming together to form a government. So currently, our government is headed by the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Libertarians, effectively, the Free Democrats, who are all governing together. That can create some problems, also because, obviously, parties don't necessarily have to adhere to their party platform, or can't necessarily adhere to their party platform always, because you'll promise something, but then your coalition partners are vehemently against it, and you have to come to an agreement of which policies from which party end up getting implemented. It's a more of a complex system, but that also means that any party that can get at least 5% of the vote, which is just the threshold in Germany, is effectively a viable political party, even if they aren't expected to form the government. Right, the FDP is effectively the Libertarians, the Greens are the Greens. So we have equivalents to your two biggest third parties, at least on a federal level. The most effective third party on the state level is the Vermont Progressive Party, but that's besides the point. And actually, it is sort of the point. But and then you have your sort of traditionally considered the two major parties, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, which are our sort of center-left and center-right parties, respectively. Is sometimes analogized to the Democrats and the Republicans, but the European political spectrum doesn't map that well to the American one, mostly because it's further left in general. I always say the Christian Democrats are actually somewhat equivalent to the Democrats, more so, and the Social Democrats are to their left. But that's again a little in the weeds. And so
it's way more democratic though than what we do.
Yeah, because again, unless you vote for like a minor party that isn't expected to reach 5%, although it's not about the expectation, but you can kind of forecast it for the most part. Every now and again, the Left Party or the Free Democrats will be like just on the line, and you're like, are they going to make 5%? Are they not? Right? Is my vote wasted if I vote for them? Sometimes it's a bit tricky, but for the most part, your vote isn't going to be wasted, right? So if you voted for Gary Johnson, and lo and behold, he didn't become president. Now, if you'd voted for Hillary Clinton, she would also not have become president. So obviously, only one person can win the presidency. But at least if you'd voted for Hillary Clinton, there would have been a chance, right? So that's sort of the thing. And it sucks if you don't like any of the major candidates. Now that is where the most democratic part of the American system are the primaries. Although the presidential primaries are a whole mess in and of themselves, because it could be that by the time your state's primary comes around, the candidate's already decided. Which is also not great. There's also other problems where, because states that are never going to vote for a candidate still have delegates, it ends up dragging the candidates more towards the center, which some might see as good, some might see as bad, depending on where your politics lie, I suppose.
Just ask Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, another interesting thing that happens in the parliamentary system is that if you want to, you can exclude a certain party from power, right? Unless they get 50% of the vote. So in Germany, the AfD is currently rising. The current polls have them at 19% of the vote. They have peaked actually a little bit higher. And they are very far right. Some people of them have been basically convicted for being Nazis. Some of their affiliated groups have been classified as far right extremists. They're not good people. And all parties at one point agreed, and I think that hasn't 100% held on some low levels, but all of the major German parties have basically agreed we're not going to build a coalition with them under any circumstances. And that is that, right? You might say it's undemocratic, but at the same time, unless a majority of people want them in power, they're not going to come into power. Because most people that don't vote for them don't want them to be in power. And that is a little bit different, I think, in some ways than other parties. Now, maybe some of the CDU voters, some of the Christian Democrat voters might be okay with the AfD. I can't speak to that. But if you vote for Social Democrats, you might be fine with the Greens being in government, right? So there is sort of that spectrum. And in France, there was this, not quite the same, but a sort of similar thing where also parties on the left and the center kind of coordinated to make it harder for the far right to win. Because if you have more than two parties, you can do that. If you only have two parties, you can't really coordinate because there's no one to coordinate with, right? I guess you can coordinate with your opponents for on a policy standpoint, but you can't on an electoral standpoint, because either you're going to win or the other people are going to win, right? There's not really a lot of options.
Yeah.
And so, that is...
Yeah, I know it'll never happen, but I wish we could adopt a system like that, because everybody that's over 5%, gets their voice heard and, gets their opinion in there. But I feel like we're kind of set up in a way to ensure that only these two parties will ever be in power. You think about the debates. You have to get 15% in the polls to be in the debates. Well, most people don't know that you are running for president if you're not in the debate. If they could drop that down, I know that you can't just have 85 people standing up there in a debate, but drop it down to 5% or something like that. Something that, where someone can get in there, because honestly, the average person.
There is another requirement that I think would maybe single-handedly solve the problem already, which I believe is already an additional requirement on top of the polling, is you have to be on the ballot in enough states that you could win the Electoral College.
Yeah.
It's if you can't win the Electoral College, you're not a serious candidate, right? It doesn't matter how many votes you get if you can't win enough states to win the presidency, then you can't win.
Yeah, then it's pointless.
Technically, obviously, in a lot of states you can write in, but I don't know the last time that a write-in. There are occasionally you'll get a state legislature race or something where a write-in wins, but generally speaking, in statewide elections, which those effectively are, you're not gonna have a write-in win, unless very special circumstances, right? I mean, Joe Biden technically won one of the primaries as a write-in because of reasons, but it's also like he is the incumbent president. And so it makes sense that even though he wasn't on the ballot in that one state for some technical reason, like people will still vote for him. But it's a primary, which not a lot of people vote in, comparatively speaking, and B, it's a very specific situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, right. So that I think is a requirement that would make sense. Where like if you can't win, you might as well not be on there. That also
definitely
helps third-party candidates. And as far as the Greens, for example, I believe are on the ballot in every state, and Libertarians are in most states. And like fully independent candidates like Cornel West or RFK, who is apparently maybe gonna drop out soon, have to like
get
RFK
is gonna drop out.
There was talks that
I haven't heard that.
He might drop out. He had previously contacted actually both Trump and Harris and basically offered to drop out if they give him a cabinet position. Which if you go to both sides for a cabinet position, that seems a little sus. But so apparently he is considering dropping out, and apparently Trump is considering giving him a cabinet position as well. So there's that. So RFK might drop out. Again, he's not going to win either way. The question is just how it's going to affect the race. And actually, RFK is an interesting candidate because, unlike most third-party candidates, he takes from both sides to like a higher degree. Now, that is probably for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously, last name is Kennedy. That helps the Democrats. And he has a lot of more Republican-leaning views on certain issues, right? He's an anti-vaxxer. He is a bit of a conspiracy theorist in general. And so those would be more aligned with Republicans, but he also, historically, he used to be an environmental protection lawyer, right? He used to be very pro-environment. I think to some degree he still is. And so that aligns him with the Democrats again, right? So it makes sense that he would take from both sides. And so, I mean, I guess the Libertarians to some degree do as well, but they tend to take more from the Republicans because their economic policies tend to be more Republican-aligned. The Greens obviously take mostly from Democrats,
Yeah, absolutely. But libertarians are very socially liberal. So, like reproductive rights and things like that, they tend to lean more toward the left for the situations like that. But of course, more toward the right with economic situations. And, it's really weird, though, because we talked off air on how parties flip-flop their ideology over time. And I think the Republicans at one point in time were kind of anti what they are in the public these days. And I was actually thinking while you were talking, I was thinking of a very good point that I forgot what the exact bullet point was. But you can continue. I'll try to remember that.
Yeah, sorry, I had to waffle.
I forgot what it was.
The Republicans.
I was like, I have a really good point, and then when I started articulating it, I'm like,
it's a thing where like you on the one hand you mentally try to hold on to the point, on the other hand you're trying to still listen to what the other person is saying, and doing both at the same time is kind of hard. I mean the Republicans used to be very much like the party of small government, right? Which is a very libertarian idea. But now they are much more pro-regulation, right? There's always been the sort of like fundamentalist Christian. I forget what the exact wording that is usually used there. But like, there's a lot of like hardcore Christians on their side, which have always been, for example, anti-abortion. But that has like become a much more mainstream position for the Republicans with Trump, and obviously with people like DeSantis, you also see a lot of like anti-LGBT stuff, like book banning. As well, right? You have anti-trans healthcare laws, right? And so there's a lot more regulation of like medicine, especially, but also of books and schooling. Schools as well, right? There was a law in some state where they have to hang up the 10 Amendments, which is technically violating the Establishment Clause, but also the Supreme Court hasn't been very supportive of the Establishment Clause, so who's to say if that actually holds? And other stuff where like you can't, like in Florida, you can't teach about slavery without saying that black people might have learned skills as slaves, which like that's stupid. But like, so even if it is true, it's still kind of like, well, there are benefits for them as well. It's like, even if there were, there is absolutely no proportion to the harms, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so, like schooling and medicine, for example, have been very heavily regulated by Republicans lately. And so that's what you said, right? Where, like, the Republicans of, like, the 90s and early 2000s would really not necessarily like the current Republican agenda now.
Yes. That was the point I was going to make, because you were talking about the anti-vaxxers and the conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
In the early 2000s, they were so anti-conspiracy theory, the Republicans were. Like, they were all for it. And it was more of a liberal ideology of that time.
I mean,
if you brought up a conspiracy theory to a Republican, they would shut you down immediately. And they were for government control.
Anti-vaxxers in particular used to come from more like the sort of the hippie direction, right? Where, like, oh, it's unnatural, right? We don't like pharma and whatnot. And,
yes.
And now it's more, has an even more conspiratorial aspect to it, and it tends to be more associated with the right. Now, in part, that is actually because of more traditional Republican ideals of, like, individual liberty, which used to be more highly valued in Republicans than in Democrats. To a degree. And it's sort of an extension of that, but at the same time, it does, like, especially on the anti-vax stuff, it has definitely flipped. Although, back when it was a more left-leaning thing to be anti-vax, it was also much less popular overall.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of the... it's crazy to think about that. A lot of the ideology that the right are claiming these days were hippie ideology back in the day, you know? It's like, I still have my freedom of speech, even though we talked about off air that they don't necessarily mean they want freedom of speech in all aspects. Basically, it's, I want freedom of speech to say my side of the story, but we can still shut down the other side of the story.
I will say, to a degree, that is oftentimes a policy, right? Where it's like, freedom of speech for us, but not for them. Now, on the Democratic side, that's mostly in terms of hate speech, where they're restricting and not necessarily trying to restrict political speech against them as much as Republicans. I'm sure there are examples of Democrats trying that, but as, like, a general, like, mainstream Democratic policy, they don't really restrict speech outside of certain things like hate speech, which Republicans are much less concerned about hate speech, mostly because a lot of it is coming from their own supporters. But they are much more concerned about being, like, conservative ideas being censored, which, again, oftentimes just means, like, Republicans do hate speech and they should be able to keep doing that. And meanwhile, as we said, right, like, book bannings for, like, kids shouldn't be able to see obscene material, which to a degree makes sense, but then for Republicans, anything that they don't like is obscene, so...
Yeah, well, that's the problem with banning. Is where do we stop? Where do we draw the line? Because then you can say, well, anything that has people of color should be banned, you know? And
I mean, you're not far off from the Republican platform.
Yeah, well, there you go. Although I do see a lot of people of color becoming Republicans lately. And another thing we talked about off air was back in the day, the Republican Party was the party for people of color. Until the ideologies were flip-flopped somewhere along the way, probably around the Lyndon Johnson era and after that.
Yeah, somewhere in the 60s it would have had to have been, right? Because JFK would have been very much more on the civil rights side of things, and Nixon very much isn't, so we can see that happening there. It's the Southern Democrats used to be the racist ones, and Northern Democrats not necessarily as much, and at some point that kind of flipped. There's also the weird thing, and that I think is much more worrying, and I think you sort of alluded to that earlier a little bit, where people associate themselves too strongly with a party, where you would get people in the South when the party's flip did happen, which again primarily affected the South, who would still vote for their old party, even though they were now not particularly well ideologically aligned with them anymore, just because they're so used to voting for one party that they keep voting for them even if the policies actually change. I mean, again, as we said, the Republicans today are quite different from the Republicans of even 10, definitely 20 years ago. And actually 10 years ago was just 2 years before Trump was first elected. So maybe not 10, but like from like 20 years ago, right?
15 to 20,
So that but still, a lot of people will still vote for them. And, some people might agree with them more now. But surely, a lot of people that would have voted for Republicans 20 years ago would agree with them less now, given that their policies changed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
no matter how you personally feel about Republicans or Democrats, right? If their policy platforms change, you would assume that some people that used to vote for them would switch. Either to another party, to a third party. Some people would stop voting. It's a whole other thing. But it's kind of weird that a lot of people are still then voting for the same party, even if the things they liked about the party have changed.
Party lock. Yeah, you get locked into this party and you start to change your own ideologies to match whatever the current narrative of that party is. It's really ridiculous to me. I've seen a few people who are very logical people who will change parties over time, and I've definitely seen that happen. Some of them become libertarians, some of them become Green Party advocates and things like that, and some of them just pick some random guy out of the blue that they like and write that name in there. But there's so many people that are just like, no, I believe whatever the right believes, regardless of what I thought 10 years ago, or the left. I believe whatever they believe, even though it's opposite of what I used to believe. Like
the left-right divide is not a very practical model for actually modeling political ideology anyways. But yeah, I mean, people are never going to 100% fit with a party. Again, right, I am in a position where I'm not sure how many different parties I've voted for, but there are definitely 3 parties that I've traditionally been at least very strongly considering in elections, which is perfectly plausible because, again, all 3 of those parties could have made 5%, at least at the times when I would have voted for them. Actually, that is one of the reasons why I was excluding one of the parties from consideration in the last election, was because I was like, they're not going to reach 5%, so I might as well not vote for them. Which they didn't reach 5%, but they did still make it. Anyways, it's a whole other thing. But yeah, no. So there, I think like those systems make more sense. There's obvious reasons for why it is different, right? Because you don't have proportional representation. Now, the UK still manages to actually have like a decent amount of party diversity, despite also being first past the post with like local candidates. They effectively, as far as the House is concerned, right? The House of Commons versus the House of Representatives, right? They're effectively the same in how they, not quite entirely the same, but in a lot of ways they're very much the same in terms of how they function, at least election-wise. Yet, there are quite a few more parties in the House of Commons than in the House of Representatives, which currently has 2 parties in it. The Senate has 2 parties and some independents. There are 4 independents in the Senate right now, which is, on the one hand, kind of wild. On the other hand, only like 1 or 2 of them, depending on how you look at it, were actually elected as independents. So that's the other thing. I mean, to be fair, Joe Manchin makes much more sense as an independent. I don't know why he was ever a Democrat. Like, he fits.
Who was it?
Joe Manchin. He, like, his economic policies fit much better with the Republicans than it does with the Democrats. Like, I don't know how. Like, he does still work with the Democrats on certain other things, so it makes sense that he wouldn't necessarily entirely be a Republican either, especially now. But, it seems odd. Kristen Sinema is a bit of an opportunist to begin with. Bernie Sanders, I believe, might have been elected on the Democratic line, but he is technically still independent. And then Angus King actually ran against a Republican and a Democrat. So, I mean, to be fair, I don't think the Democrats put a lot of money into that particular race because he's caucusing with them. And so, like, they're fine with him. But, yeah, he is, in a lot of ways, a true independent, but also he's always been associating with Democrats, so... Not the...
yeah.
I mean, I guess the party
it happens on the other side.
But...
Yeah, it happens on the other side also. I remember Herman Cain ran in the primaries a few years back. I don't even know if he's still alive anymore, but I think he was like the
Is he literally the guy that the Herman Cain Awards were named after? Like...
Herman Cain Award?
There's a subreddit called Herman Cain Award, which is, it's a lot of the posts are just like people being like, oh, I'm not scared of COVID, and then 2 months later they're dead from COVID.
I don't even know this exists.
So yeah,
yes, that's probably
so
named after
I'm assuming
him,
he died of COVID, or of some other stupid thing that, he was specifically pointing out wasn't actually a risk. That's kind of the Herman Cain Award.
Yeah. But guys like that, I think Ben Johnson, he was the brain surgeon, I believe, or he was some kind of doctor that he ended up being almost second in line behind Trump in 2016, I believe it was.
I'm sure Trump could use a brain surgeon.
But most of those guys were independents or libertarians, and some of them even the more left-leaning parties. But they jump on that Republican ticket to try to get the nomination, because third parties, like I said, never going to win. And if we can't get them on debates, then it's never going to happen, regardless of how hated the candidates are.
I think the realistic thing you should do if you're a third-party supporter is you should probably, in the presidential election, still vote for the candidate you prefer out of the two major party candidates, or if you don't like either of them, the one you dislike less. I think,
but that's adding to the problem.
Yeah,
that's why it'll never change.
Well, I think it can, though, because yes, obviously, a third-party candidate performing comparatively well can still boost their profile in the future. But I think the real way for a third party to gain power is to start small, right? And there are third parties that are much more successful by not going for the presidency, right? If you have people in Congress for your party, that could help boost the party's profile, and then maybe eventually they become viable as a presidential party, right? But House seats are contested. Like, there's comparatively small amount of voters voting for a House seat, and there are more of them, of the seats, so there are more opportunities for people of the third party to get in the House. Now, granted, I think historically we have had situations where there was like one libertarian or one green in the House. You don't really get a lot of them, but that is certainly much more plausible. And obviously state legislatures, right, you have a lot of, there's like literally thousands of state legislative seats across the nation, right? I think those are places where third parties could do a lot better. Obviously, you also got states that for certain positions have ranked choice voting, which I think is still like the ranked choice instant runoff model. I think still is perfect for that, right? In Alaska, if you like the Libertarians and you like the Democrats second best and you like the Republicans third best or whatever, and there's candidates of those parties running in your district, you can just vote for them in that order and it'll sort itself out. So that's obviously great. And then obviously in I believe 2 states, one of which is New York, you have electoral fusion, which is also interesting, where multiple parties can nominate the same candidate effectively, but they still get each their own party line. So if you prefer the Conservatives or the Working Families Party, you can vote for them instead of the Republicans or Democrats, and they generally just co-endorse from those two parties respectively, but occasionally they run their own candidates here and there in the district, where if the Working Families Party doesn't like the Democrat, they might run their own candidate. Also, a couple of candidates that are like libertarian/Republican, for example, over there. So in that case, it's the parties are in essence getting relevance by kind of hitching onto the existing parties. Whether or not that is a good model is a little bit subjective as well, but I think that is kind of where the third parties come in, right? Again, the Vermont Progressive Party is like not even doing that poorly, right? In Vermont, like they genuinely have some seats in the state legislature. Right, I think on some city councils, I think there was the biggest city in Vermont has like 6 city council seats, 3 of which are Democrats, 3 of which are progressives, right? Obviously, cities, progressives, obviously that goes together, but like those are very successful. I think the second biggest party in DC is Statehood Green. Now, DC, not a state, but I guess that's kind of the point, right? Statehood Green is obviously pro-statehood. And Republicans are number 3 over there. So I think on like state level politics, or district level if you prefer, like I think is where third parties can succeed a lot more. Obviously Puerto Rico has its own parties. They used to also have 2 parties, but now I think they have 4 or 5 that are like somewhat competitive. A lot of those politicians still associate with the Democrats or the Republicans on the national level, but that is not entirely down party lines. So there might be 2 people that are on the same party in Puerto Rico, but would be for different parties on the national stage, which is interesting. So I do think that is where the third parties belong, if you will, right? Like in a presidential election, if you're not going to win, you might as well not run a candidate, is my opinion. I think third parties should really focus more on things they can actually win. Again, like state legislative seats, like occasionally maybe like a House seat here and there. So if I was the Libertarians, I would primarily focus on running candidates in districts that they can win, right? Either if you have like a Republican district where like they're never going to vote for Democrats, but maybe not everyone's socially conservative, or if you have a Democratic seat where maybe people just don't like the MAGA Republicans, but maybe they would take someone who's more fiscally conservative, right? So like that is where I would run people. If I was the Greens, I would run people basically only in blue districts. I would try to go after Democratic seats. Now, obviously, that would still hurt the Democrats, which you would still prefer over the Republicans. But if it comes to a situation where the House is like, I don't know, I'm sort of offended. If it's like 216 Democrats and 216 Republicans, and what does it leave? Like 3 Greens, right? Then they could build a coalition, right? That works, and then they have a lot of power.
Yeah.
Because we've seen that with the Republicans recently, where the Freedom Caucus, I believe they call themselves, right? Like the far right of the party had like 5 people, but without them, the Republicans couldn't get anything done because their majority was so slim. And so they actually had a disproportionate impact, because if they were like, oh, we're not voting for that, then you'd have to find Democratic votes. And then that is also tricky, right? So I think that is where third parties should put their efforts. And then if you end up in a situation where you do maybe have to like build a coalition with one of the major parties for government, or you have multiple seats then that shows that you are like a serious party. And then maybe in the next election, you get more houses, so maybe you get some senators, right? And then eventually you could displace one of the major parties, or at the very least, it could be like a 33 split, right? And then you could run a presidential candidate, but they can actually win.
I was thinking, what if there was a coalition between the third parties? Like, what if the Libertarians go over to the Green Party and we're like, okay, we can put together a ticket of, president and vice president running together. We can rally our supporters together and maybe get enough to at least get our 2 candidates into the debates and whatnot. And you could bring in like I was going to say like the Tea Party or the Constitution Party. They may be a little too far right to actually agree to go along, but maybe there are some parties like that would join up and just have this big rally, this big support. And you probably need to do it in a year like 2016, where the candidates that are chosen are not the greatest people. That they're losing support. But if you could just get onto the debates, you have a fighting chance.
Yeah, I think
you got to punch your face.
The problem with like a Green Libertarian unity ticket is that the Greens' primary policy is obviously environmental, which means a lot of like regulation on what corporations can do to the environment, right? That's like the main thing.
But
and Libertarians' main policy is to deregulate the market, right? So I think they're like very opposed in that sense. They might agree on social policies, but for the Greens, that's definitely like a second level priority, and for Libertarians, it's at best equal, right? So,
that's the thing. You would have to have a compromise.
Yeah, but
you would definitely have to have a compromise.
Again, I think on their core issues, they're sort of diametrically opposed, which is the problem. There was actually Cornel West, I think, in 2020. He was the Green candidate, and so there was a Green Socialist unity ticket, right? So the Greens and Socialists worked together. Socialists aren't a particularly big party in the US, but there was like, they had like, I think technically Cornel West was the socialist in that scenario, and his vice presidential pick was a Green party candidate, and they had support from like all of the state Green parties, or most of them at least, and the socialist parties, and like still not necessarily particularly successful. And I don't know what the perfect environment for that is. I mean, obviously, if you had like a lower stakes election, that would also maybe help to a degree, where I feel like the last couple of elections have you're either pro-Trump or anti-Trump, right? That's sort of the framing of that.
Yeah.
Where
there weren't
that many pro-Biden people, right? I mean, I'm sure there are pro-Biden people, but a lot of the people that were for Biden were more so against Trump. And if you don't want Trump to win, you kind of have to vote for the Democrats, because that's sort of your only viable choice there. And in that environment, it's very hard, I think, for third-party candidates to do well. 2016 was different because Trump was seen quite differently, right? He was still disagreeable to people, but they didn't really think of him as dangerous necessarily. And like if he was going to tear the system down, that's probably a good thing. And now it's like, oh, the way he's trying to tear down the system is actually very bad. And in that kind of a race where like both are very disliked, but it doesn't seem as very high stakes, I think that could work better. But it's always tricky, right? Where and I guess that's where ranked choice voting would also be very useful. But you'd probably have to do it on the federal level, although maybe you could do that on the state level. Where I guess you could do that on the state level, where you do instant runoff for the president. I think that could work because 2000, right? You had Al Gore would have won if what's his face didn't run. Why am I blanking on that right now? I kind of you generally like the moment you mentioned Ross Perot, the name of the guy in the 2000 Ralph Nader, like immediately left my brain. So if Nader hadn't run, Gore would have won. That is not a maybe. That's a definitive. That's about as definitive as a fact as you can be about like facts that you can't quite prove. Right? So there was exit poll.
99%.
And 90% of Nader voters said if there was ranked choice voting, the second choice would have been Gore. Meaning, 90% of Nader voters would have been Gore voters in a instant runoff system. Meaning Al Gore would have won in 2000, which I mean obviously would have had a lot of knock-on effects, but that would have, I think it would have maybe flipped multiple states. But there was like, I think Florida was the one which was like the tipping point state, and that one definitely would have been. I think Nader was actually fairly good in Florida, so that one would have definitely gone to Gore. And so ranked choice voting is actually the way to go. Now, obviously, I just said ranked choice voting would have led to Al Gore winning instead of Bush winning, which we're still talking about the two major party candidates, but I think you could very easily see how people that were more pro-environment, for example, which I think was both the policy of Gore and of Nader, right? Like those kind of people, like the progressives, the environmentalists, would have voted for either candidate, right? So you could see people that might have actually preferred Nader over Gore, still voting for Gore in the real election because Nader wasn't going to win. And so some amount of the Gore voters would have probably voted Nader 1, Gore 2, if it was a ranked choice system. And so the third party candidate would have had a much better chance if it was ranked choice. And as best as I know, there's nothing stopping states from making the presidential election ranked choice. Now, in practice, I don't know if that would work. There was a Supreme Court case recently about some states wanted to exclude Trump from the ballot because of the whole insurrection thing. And the Supreme Court ruled that they wanted some degree of uniformity on state ballots when it comes to the presidential race, because that's the same race in every state, even if it is different ballots still. But at the same time, third-party candidates will still be on some state ballots and on others, so there's no perfect uniformity either. So whether or not the Supreme Court would actually allow states to do ranked choice voting for the president is an open question. But I don't see an actual, like, a textual argument for why that shouldn't be allowed. And then the state could be like, okay, in our state, you'd pick, in order of preference, how you like the presidential candidates, and you don't have to put for everyone in.
Yeah.
You just put one for your preferred candidate, and if another candidate you like, you put a 2. And then, obviously, if your first preferred candidate is last, then they get eliminated, and the person second gets those votes instead, and so on and so forth. I hope most people know how instant runoff works. And so you can then just vote for, again, Green candidate 1, Democrat 2, Libertarian 1, Republican 2, Libertarian 1, Democrat 2. Both of those probably would exist. And so I think that, again, I don't think there's anything like constitutionally preventing states from doing that. And if you do it in one state, then obviously it's only going to affect that one state. And that still can technically fuck things up, and as far as if the third-party candidate wins that one state, but still lose everywhere else, then you could get to the thing where no one wins a majority of the Electoral College, in which case it goes to the House, I think, for the president, and to the Senate for the vice president. And they vote on a per-state level, which favors the Republicans, because a lot of the smaller states tend to be more Republican. And that's all kind of worms, but in theory, like, ranked choice voting on a per state level could work, and hopefully would then propagate to all states. There are initiatives working on that. Some states have already adopted ranked choice voting for certain elections, right? California, I think, does it for their open primaries. Alaska does it for their primaries and their general election. I mean, California, it doesn't make sense to do it for the general because it's a top 2 primary, and so the top 2 candidates from the primary advance to the general, so there are only 2 candidates in the general, so ranked choice voting with 2 candidates makes no sense. In Alaska, the first 4 advance. I find it a bit silly that they hold the primaries even if there are fewer than 4 candidates. But that's the point. So, there are, and those are probably not the only places, those are just the ones from the top of my head where I know they do that. And so I think ranked choice voting with an instant runoff system, technically there's another ranked choice voting method as well that could also work, but the point is ranked choice voting of some sort, I think would be a solution to make third parties more viable, and simultaneously not make third party voters waste their vote if their party doesn't end up being particularly good.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably the fairest way to do it. And one solution would be a federal ballot. Like, yes, I understand that each state with their electoral college is going to have a different value for their ultimate winner, of course, but what's wrong with a federal ballot so that all of them are uniform? And then there's no question as to, well, we can't do it because Hawaii's ticket is going to look like this. Well, Hawaii can't do it because Oregon's ticket is going to be like this. And then it's going to throw everything out of whack. What's wrong with a federal ballot? Everybody has the same ballot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just purely on a practical level, right? The voting methods, or at the very least, the fact that it's down to the states and a lot of that, and the electoral college are things in the Constitution. Constitutional amendment would take, I think, was it 2/3 or 3/4 of both chambers, and then I think 3/4 of all states on top of that. So some states also have it in their constitution that they need 2/3 of their legislature to pass a constitutional amendment. Others just need a simple majority, but it's still 3/4 of the states. And at the end of the day, it's going to be very hard to change the Constitution, just as a practical matter. Maybe
but
down the line,
done 27 times.
Maybe down the line it's going to happen, but right now, that's just very implausible. So I think ranked choice voting is something that you can implement without having to change the Constitution. I also think for the more populous states, it might make sense. So primarily Texas and California, it might make sense to actually have a proportional system for your for the House of Representatives, right? So you have 50 seats. You might as well just have people vote and then proportionally assign it to the parties with a party list system, like in Germany. That doesn't really work if you're Alaska, right? Or Wyoming, where they only get one representative. It's okay, you have one candidate, you can't really do much about that. Obviously, still would make a lot of sense for state legislatures in any given state, because those all have quite a few seats. Some more than others, but still. And so I think that would make sense. That also gets rid of a lot of other issues, like gerrymandering, right? Gerrymandering being the act of assigning the districts in such a way that it favors a certain party. It gets rid of gerrymandering. It makes third parties much more competitive, because if you're California and you have, I think, 53 electors, so 51 representatives, I guess.
Something like that, yeah.
Somewhere around there. Right? So they have about 50 people they send to the House. And so if you have a party that has, 2% of the vote? The Greens probably could easily get 10% of the vote in California. That doesn't sound implausible.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But if they get 10% in every district, they're not going to get in every district. There are some more conservative districts. But, they're not going to get 50% in any given district. So they're not going to get any people sent to the House. Whereas if they're both proportional, you would probably end up with 70% Democrats, 20% Republicans, 10% Greens, or something like that. Maybe some Libertarians in there. That's all estimations. I might be wrong. It might be more 60% Democrats or something. I don't know. The point is, you would get every party sending people to the House of Representatives, making it, believe it or not, representative. Whereas now they're just sending Republicans and Democrats. So I think that would make sense. And again, right, if you have 3 seats, then maybe the party list system doesn't make sense. If you are Maine, you have 2 representatives, and you have like a party list system, it's going to end up sending one Republican, one Democrat. At that point, you might as well do districts. But if you're somewhere where you have like say more than 10 representatives, it might make sense to have proportional representation. Obviously, for state legislatures, it makes sense in general. And those are all things you can do without changing the Constitution, without having to like change any federal laws, as far as I'm aware. And so those are actually plausible to do.
Absolutely. Yep. But so many things we do in America are not fair or democratic, even though we claim it is.
I mean, yeah, as far as democracies go, I think out of the countries that have fair elections on paper, where, you know, like, the ballots that are cast are the ones that get counted, and those determine the result. Out of those countries, you have like probably the least fair election system out of any that I'm aware of.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, again, right, there are other countries like Russia where, yes, people do vote, but also, yeah, it doesn't matter if Putin is not getting a majority. Putin had like over 90% of the vote last time. And yes, obviously, by like disallowing opposition candidates for most serious opposition parties, it makes sense that he would get a lot of votes. But we're all fairly certain he didn't get that many votes, right? Like, he's just trying to make up numbers. So, obviously, that is worse. But, like, from the countries that fairly count the vote, I think the US might have the worst election system.
I don't know. In countries with a more strict government, maybe a lot of people vote for the leader only because they're afraid of being on that other side if, you know, that leader decides to add some repercussions to not voting for him. Yeah,
obviously, those situations are more complicated. But again, out of the democratic countries, I think the U.S. in some ways is the least democratic because, again, you got and just the system in itself, right? Like the existence of the Electoral College and the Senate is preposterous. I mean, okay, the Senate would be fine if it was more like House of Lords, where you can get a bill passed without having to go through the Senate. So in the UK, for example, the House of Lords, which is not elected, they're literally, some of those are hereditary titles. It's actually like very undemocratic as well. Like the UK is also very high on the like undemocratic democracies list. But if they don't want to pass a law, they can delay it and it goes back to the Commons, and eventually, like I think the Commons like it can ping pong like once or twice, and eventually the Commons just gets to pass it, like without the Lord's support. Like they can do that. Now, technically, the UK is even less democratic because technically the king could then just not sign it. And there the Commons can't do anything, but also there is a reason why that hasn't happened.
When you have a royal family, that's throws another monkey wrench into the gears for sure. I believe nothing will ever change. That's the conclusion. Is nothing will ever change.
I don't think that's true. I think that's a very negative view. There are efforts to change. Maybe not the proportional stuff. Like that is maybe a little bit too advanced for you Americans. But there are efforts on ranked choice voting. So like open primaries as well. In some places. So I do think there are genuine efforts to try to make the country more democratic. Now, obviously, there are, at the same time, also efforts to make the country less democratic. By the way, for all the Americans out there, make sure that you register to vote if you want to vote in November, which you should vote in November. And because a lot of states have been purging the voter rolls. So people that were previously registered might no longer be. So, make sure that you're registered. And also, some of the deadlines start happening soon. So, registration deadlines. So, be sure to actually be registered.
Yeah. I've definitely registered, voted, and then one election I decided to vote again, and they were like, "You're not registered." So that has happened to me before.
And you have to register 4 weeks in advance, and there's no same-day registration, so that sucks. That's specifically in Georgia, of course. Things differ by state, so like that's not general advice to other people. I was just talking to Smokey specifically. And it's 1 week before early voting on the day. Which means there's no time where you can both vote and register, which is a little bit annoying. Also, voter registration is another thing that's undemocratic, but we were talking about third-party candidates and about how the US is undemocratic. Like, in Germany, you'll just get a letter that's like, oh yeah, by the way, election coming up. Like, do you want a mail-in ballot or do you want to vote in person? And you just fill that out if you want a mail-in ballot, or you just don't if you want to vote in person. And then you just go to your polling place, or you fill out your mail-in ballot, and then you vote, right? We don't have voter registration.
Yeah. Well, what's the percentage of voter turnout?
Let's see. The last German federal election, which is probably the one with the highest turnout, also the only federal level one, because the EU elections were last year, they probably have lower turnout, was 76.4%.
Wow.
Let's see.
You know, that's not of all people. That's of registered voters, I assume.
Again, no voter registration.
You say don't have to register. Yeah.
So I'm assuming it's of eligible voters.
Yeah.
It honestly, I will say, that's the one thing I don't see a source on this in particular. Like, it's on Wikipedia. I generally trust Wikipedia for things like that. If it's not important, right? It's not like.
Yeah.
I would double check it if it was like really important, but.
I was just wondering, compared to America, because it's only been the past few elections that we got up over 50% of registered voters, not of all people.
Okay. In 2020, the Federal Election Commission calculated a voter turnout of 62.8% in 2020 as the votes for president divided by the estimated U.S. population at or over the age of 18. The denominator included U.S. residents eligible to vote, blah, blah, blah. The U.S. Census Bureau calculated voter turnout of 66.8%. As people reporting having voted divided by the estimated U.S. population at over a age who were citizens. The denominator excludes citizens who are ineligible to vote for not... Okay, yeah. So, it depends on how you calculate it in the U.S. because obviously ineligibility is a thing, but around 2/3 of people, where in Germany it was over 3/4.
3/4. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But I mean, there was times, if you go back to the 90s and 2000s where less than half the people were voting. And now they've done their job on getting people invested into politics, for sure. Now I just wish they could get people invested in a third party.
I don't think it says here. I'm assuming the voting age was 18. I don't know that for a fact, though. But that's not really... You see here or there. Although young voters tend to turn less. Because I know for some elections in Germany, the age is 16. But right, facts of the week. Starting with yours.
Yeah, let me find it real quick. Where'd I put it? All right. This is something I didn't realize, but it absolutely makes sense to me. It is, you remember more dreams when you sleep badly. Research suggests that if you sleep badly and wake up multiple times throughout the night, you will be more likely to recall the content of all your dreams you had. You are also more likely to remember a dream when waking up from one. So that makes sense to me, right? Because when you're in a deep sleep, your memory doesn't tend to record as well as when you're in a light sleep. So when you wake up from sleeping badly, or if you're waking up suddenly, you tend to recall your dreams that much better.
Yeah. That makes sense. I personally don't have a lot of experience with that because I, like, 99% of the time, probably more, I can't recall my dreams, right? I think there was like maybe 2 or 3 times last year within the last 20 to 365 days, whatever, that I actually remembered a dream when I woke up. So it's very rare for me. As a child, I used to remember them a lot more, but lately I barely remember any dreams that I have, which I think is a good sign, I guess. Deep, relaxing sleep, no nightmares.
It's kind of opposite though to what at least we were taught as children. I remember in school we were taught that you only dream during your deepest sleep, during the REM sleep, and that's the only time that you're dreaming throughout the night, which can't be true if this fact is true, right?
Well, no. First of all, REM sleep is not... I mean, there's literally a phase called deep sleep, which is not the same as REM sleep. Second of all, you can be awoken from any phase of sleep, I think. So That's not necessarily.
But yeah, you can be woken up, but this is saying if you sleep badly, it is in you're constantly waking up throughout there. That's kind of a separate from the being woken up, by accident or whatever.
I mean, if you don't sleep well, then you start with deep sleep usually. If you are sleep deprived, you start with REM sleep. So, but yeah, no. When you wake up, I think it can be in any phase. Anyways, another medical fact, that's a stretch. I mean, okay, so there was a case that I just found out about where a doctor, a surgeon to be precise, signed his initials on livers he was transplanting with an argon beam machine. Okay, that's apparently just regular surgical equipment. But yeah, he signed his initials on at least 2 livers he transplanted.
Wow.
Subsequently, he was charged with 2 counts of assault by beating. That was in Britain, by the way. I find it funny that it's assault by beating because, like, I'm sure that makes sense with like how the law is worded, but just based on the name, it's like argon laser, beating. I don't know, not the same thing.
Yeah.
He was fined £10,000. His medical license was suspended, and eventually he was struck from the register, which I believe means his license was revoked. Apparently, the tribunal said it accepted that no lasting physical damage was caused to either patient. So apparently it's harmless, which is interesting to me. Apparently you could just like put an argon laser on the liver and it like leaves marks that are identifiable as writing, but also apparently there's no damage really. And his action came to light when a 4-centimeter initial was discovered by another doctor on an organ that had been transplanted and failed about a week after the operation. So, apparently, the organ failure is unrelated to the branding, but 4 centimeters, 1.6 inches in freedom units was the size of the initials. And yeah, one of the patients died, but apparently that's not related to the branding directly.
Yeah. Wow, I have a couple questions. Like, why? For one, what is the point of signing your initials? Like, you don't expect anyone to ever see it ever again if that person has a successful, long life, and they die with the liver.
It's just ego.
Who's going to see it, and why does it matter? But that's the other thing also is it really that big of a deal? If it does not harm the patient at all, why do we need to punish him?
I mean, I can see the punishing, especially the withdrawing the license, because it seems like this is the kind of thing where, like, if you don't adhere to the proper procedures, what's next, right? Like, even if this is harmless, like, what is he going to do next, right? Like, I don't think I would want that guy operating on me, just in general, even if the one thing he's been known to do is technically harmless. B, I don't know if it is, like, 100% harmless, or if it's just, it doesn't create any lasting damage, so, like, the liver will just heal. Which, I mean, I guess is still not bad, but, like, I don't know, it seems wrong, and I think there are reasons why things are done a certain way, and if you deviate from them, like, what's the next thing he's gonna do? And also, like, I just generally don't want, like, a surgeon with too much of an ego. Like, I mean, there's some ego that's very common with surgeons, and obviously you want someone who's confident, but also too much ego, again, it, like, makes them make bad decisions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was a plastic surgeon here in Atlanta that lost her medical license for filming TikToks and dancing while performing procedures.
That's a
and I guess it went against HIPAA. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep, that's exactly what happened. And she was filming the patients while they were under anesthesia, while doing her dances and bragging about her work and whatever. I was like, yeah, that's you should have known better than that.
I mean,
that's stupid.
That would be fine if the patient signed a waiver, probably. A waiver.
Yeah, if they signed a waiver.
A wafer.
A wafer. A vanilla wafer.
Yeah, I immediately went to, like, the communal wafers. Yeah, so. A waiver. I mean, I wonder, like, this. I mean, obviously, no patient would sign it unless there's something in it for them, so you probably have to give them discounts or something. I wonder how ethical that is as a business practice, but that's neither here nor there. That's a purely hypothetical scenario.
Oh yeah.
How about halftime show.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hurdle decade starting with the 50s.
Uh-huh.
Yep, that's the 50s.
Yep, definitely. And it sounds familiar, but I can't place it right offhand.
I mean, to me, it only sounds familiar as far as it sounds a lot like a lot of 50s songs.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm probably not going to know it. I mean, the only 50 song that I know is Rock Around the Clock, which this isn't, but that's the only one that I know for a fact that I definitely know. So I probably don't know any other 50 songs, but no, well, maybe some of the Elvis ones, but yeah,
I may know it, so maybe. Oh man, I was hoping to get some vocals, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound generally familiar, but I probably nothing.
Goodbye, Joe.
Mio, that's Jambalaya. Goodbye, Joe. Me gotta go. Mio, my,
Okay, I might be able to recognize that at some point.
Yeah, Fats Domino. I was gonna say Fats Domino. Yeah.
Because I know Jambalaya, I just happen to know it by CCR.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's been covered by so many people.
So that was the 50s, now time for the 60s. That's how time works. I know that one.
Again? Yeah. Sounds familiar?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to listen to that again. I don't think I'm gonna get it from that, but I do think I might know it.
Yeah, me too. It sounds familiar, but I can't get it from that.
Not yet. I feel less confident.
Not yet. Kind of wasn't expecting a harmonica.
Yeah,
I remember you. I remember you.
I remember.
I don't remember. I don't know the artist's name.
You by Frank Ifield.
There you go. Yeah, it's got to be.
Yeah. Yeah. No. It turns out I don't know the song after all. 70s. Not available in my country. Let's do Super 70s. I don't know what that means, but let's do Super 70s instead of regular 70s because apparently regular 70s doesn't work here.
Is that the Doors? Not enough to tell.
Okay.
Jesus, there's a lot of Doors.
We have LA Woman, The Changeling, Love Her Madly, Hyacinth House, Crawling King Snake, Cars His By My Window, and the rest is the Doobie Brothers, who happen to have all the letters to form the Doors in their name.
Man, some of those I don't even know about the Doors, but I would say most. I know LA Woman. I don't think that's it.
I want to say I don't know.
We could do
things I know some Doors songs, but I don't know those Doors songs.
Yeah, exactly. We could pick one at random and just see if it hits. Hyacinth House.
Hyacinth House. Submit. No.
Not it. All right. Yeah, more of the same. Still not enough to tell.
In retrospect, if we do still think it's the Doors, I should have guessed about a Doors song rather than skip it.
Yeah, true. But I don't know. It may not be the Doors. It just sounds like a Doors guitar riff.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where there's just too many Doors songs to guess anyways, unless we just happen to get lucky.
And it still sounds like them, but
How do you feel about bongos? It might have just been drums, but it sounded kind of like bongos to me.
yeah. Well, I mean, they definitely experimented with drums like that for sure, but I don't know. I mean, we could either skip or try another Doors song.
Oops, Doors.
Mm-mm.
That was very distorted.
No. Yeah. It doesn't sound like Jim Morrison either.
Well, I mean, with that much distortion on there, I don't know if you could tell who it is.
Yeah, true. A lot of flanger on the voice.
Which is the problem.
Yep,
right?
no clue.
Yeah, I don't think there's any.
The Changeling, maybe? Nope. If I could tell what he was saying.
I believe it was "We Sail Through Endless." Well, I mean,
okay.
Endless. I mostly just inferred. I mean, that wasn't full word, but So sail. Well, I guess sailing. That doesn't seem like it would be it. And I think the next one was "Endless" at the end there. Endless.
Yeah.
But that doesn't even.
It's no endless.
I mean, it's possible that I misunderstood it because it wasn't very clear, but that's what I assumed it was. But yeah, I got nothing. Yeah. Do you have anything?
Yeah, no, I don't.
Black Sabbath with Planet Caravan.
Black Sabbath? That was Ozzy?
Not necessarily. Didn't they have?
Oh yeah, it could be. Dio took over after Ozzy.
I was gonna say they had someone else who's also very well known, but yeah, there was Dio.
Actually, Ozzy was probably there until 74, 75.
I was gonna say it depends on if that already happened in the 70s that I wasn't sure of, but
yeah, could be Ronnie James Dio, yeah.
But yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I still don't know what Super 70s means, but at least it worked unlike the regular 70s one. 80s. Loading player. There we go. Well, I mean, it's still loading.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't hear anything.
I mean, yeah, me neither. This is a loading indicator. And I don't even need to double check that I have good internet because I can still hear you.
Yeah. That's weird.
Let me quickly see if that is specific to that song. Let's try as an alternative to 80s number ones. Seems to have the same issue. Is that just a
Is the Hurdle website down?
It would probably have to be the. I mean, it loads the player though, which it doesn't. Which also takes a second. I don't know. Well, I guess it's Hurdle for today.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, hey, we did 3.
Yeah. Yeah, we got 2 of them, right?
I know we got 1.
Oh.
Right? No. Did we get
No, we got 2. Yeah.
50s and 60s.
Yeah, Chubby Checker was the 50s. And 60s was I Remember You.
50s was Jambalaya, but...
yeah, Chubby Checker, Jambalaya, 50s, yeah. Was it Fats Domino? Sorry. Yeah. It wasn't Chubby Checker, it was Fats Domino.
I was like, no.
Portly. They're both portly nicknames.
I couldn't have told you what it is, but... okay, so... The second topic is, will you press the button? I think we'll do like, I don't know, 3 or 4 of them, and I will quickly double check
All
if Hurdle works again. If it doesn't, then we'll just move on to Songs of the Week.
right.
Maybe if it doesn't, we'll do one extra button or something. We'll see. Right, so scene switch.
All right.
There. Will you press the button? Racism becomes illegal worldwide. But any form of racism is punished with lynching.
Wow.
I mean, there's an obvious answer here.
Lynching tend to be associated with racism.
I mean, I suppose that is the idea, right? Where it's like, it's kind of ironic then.
Yeah.
But
I mean, yeah, it would be cool if racism did not exist, but this is not saying it doesn't exist, that it's illegal, which, I mean, I guess...
if it is actually, like, consistently enforced, then it will die out pretty quickly. But also, any form of racism is punished with lynching. It's like, first of all, I'm anti-death penalty. Second of all, I'm all for proportionate punishments, right? And so, if any form of racism, that means off-color jokes and stuff as well, right? Like, I mean, that's just like unconscionable.
Yeah, that's way too harsh. Like, and where's the line? Like, like you were saying, off-color jokes. Like, who's the joke czar, or the racism czar that decides what is and what isn't racism?
I mean, that in and of itself is an interesting question, but like, even if there was an objective measure of whether or not something is racist, the line for being racist and being racist to a point where it requires a rather extreme punishment is obviously not the same line.
No, not at all. Also, definitely not.
Also, a lot of parts of the world, although, maybe not a lot, but like, a lot of the Western countries, most of the Western countries, already have, like, provisions for hate crimes and accommodations laws and whatnot, so racism sort of already is illegal in a lot of those places. Not everywhere, of course, but that's the other thing. I will not.
Yeah, at least it's displaying the racism.
50-50.
Wow.
Technically ever so slightly in favor of yes.
I don't know. I think the people who are saying yes haven't thought that through.
Yes, I would agree. You know what? Let's see. There are comments. Racism is bad. Okay, yeah. Black Lives Matter would wave goodbye in the wind. Seeing as it mentions illegal, assume that lynching is a mandatory criminal sentence, lynching would likely be considered cruel and unusual punishment, and therefore unconstitutional, downside invalid. First of all, cruel and unusual punishment being unconstitutional is not a worldwide principle. And second of all, that's not how that works. Like, that's not how a hypothetical works, I think. So
that would, man, that second comment there, that kind of makes sense, though, because if racism disappears, then those organizations disappear along with there, because there's no use for their existence.
But, the fact of the matter is, everyone who said something that was like explicitly like for the yes category, I think hasn't thought this, as you said. Or at the very least,
exactly.
The one who has thought it through didn't think it through enough. Like, the one who was like, oh yeah, it's unconstitutional, so it wouldn't happen. It's like, A, I don't think that's how hypotheticals work, and B, like, your US Constitution only works in like a fairly small part of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
You're excellent at using chopsticks, but you can never use a fork again.
I mean, I already am really good with chopsticks. But I don't know. I don't think I would push that, because there are certain situations where you would rather have a fork than chopsticks.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, right? For, like, there are probably situations where chopsticks are preferable, because that's the first thing, right? Is there ever a situation where chopsticks are better than a fork? Because if there wasn't, then this is kind of moot already, right? If you prefer fork or chopsticks just generally. I think there are situations where chopsticks are worthwhile. Okay, so that's worth considering, right? Then are there situations where a fork would be more useful than chopsticks? I would say yes, which then speaks against the chopsticks one. And then the third one is, I can already competently use chopsticks for the most part. Like, I'm not great at them, but I can use them. Yeah. And if I wanted to be excellent at them, I could be. I would just have to practice a bit more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I ate lots and lots of Chinese and got really good at them.
It was like, if I really cared enough to get that good at chopsticks, I would just do it, right? And then I could still use forks. So, like...
Yeah, absolutely.
No thank you. 48.52. I mean, honestly, this one is not that serious. I think it is fair enough.
Not,
I do think it's more logical to pick no, because it's like you get the skill that you could probably learn well enough fairly quickly.
Yeah,
but you have a restriction that you could just avoid if you click no.
Maybe they're considering it to mean that you will never be able to use chopsticks if you don't press the button.
Yeah, but that's not what the question says. I mean, you can read sometimes things into it, but I think that's a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's that thing where, like, just based on how easy it would be to learn, maybe not excellent at chopsticks, but, like, reasonably good at chopsticks, is like, okay, yeah, that's not worth the downside. But I can see why some people would be like, oh, if I was great at chopsticks, I wouldn't need a fork anymore. This is not that serious. I'll let this one slide.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, slightly favoring no still. You will never be banned from anything, but people will be jealous and try to ruin your experiences.
Always the haters, man. What? Never be banned from anything. I don't believe I'm banned from anything now.
That's what I was thinking as well.
I'm trying to think of something that I might be banned from. I don't think. I mean,
if they double check my YouTube channel, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be let into Russia. But
yeah.
I mean, just based on what I said today alone, really.
I mean, technically, this day and age, I'm not even banned from competing in women's sports. So there's that. I mean, maybe weight classes if you want to box or some kind of combat sport.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to be at the Olympics, I do believe there are still requirements on hormone levels for trans athletes. So actually, you might be banned.
Maybe.
Although, then the question is, right, is it a ban or is that a restriction? Is there a difference between a ban and a restriction, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, can you just walk into authorized personnel only doors, right? Like,
well, if you're never banned from anything, that means you could compete and use PEDs.
I suppose.
And have an advantage. But the haters are going to try to ruin your experience the whole time.
I mean, at that point, the haters might be justified.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I think, like, realistically, I don't see much of the upside, and like, what? Like, anytime I go somewhere where I could theoretically be banned, I'm gonna have haters, like, trying to ruin my experience. Like, no thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I've been banned from enough places to need to push that button.
Yeah, I will also go with not. Like, 52% of people, 47% said they will. Again, this is one where I could see people coming out either way, so I'm not feeling too strongly about this.
Yeah.
And now we go back to hurdle decades. Let's see if it works now. The 80s.
Oh. No.
That's a no. Okay, let's do 2 more button questions and then move on to the songs of the week. You can get any girl/guy you want, but you can never fall in love.
And then what's, I guess, merely for sexual gratification.
Yeah, I suppose. Okay, I will say the thing that I always say about these these sort of things where, like just the supposed upside is icky in its first place, right? Like, I don't like circumventing people's free will, especially when it comes to things like this. Like, this is just, like, the first thing is icky to me, and the second thing is a genuine downside. So, to me, this is 2 bad things. I'm not picking this.
Yeah. Me either.
38% of people did pick it. 62% said no. Again, right? I do feel like when you think it through, any of the "you can have anyone you want" question was very creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
You can have the power to communicate with animals, but you lose the ability to communicate with humans.
All right, what are the advantages here? You can be like the Beastmaster in real life.
Yeah.
You can be like, but you can't talk to people if you ever run into them.
I mean, the first question that I have is, do we play this by like standard fantasy rules, or do we play this by like actual realistic rules, right? Because by the fantasy rules, you can like go up to basically any animal and like ask them some helpful question. They'll give you like helpful answer. If you play this by like realistic rules, most animals aren't going to be particularly great communication partners, right?
And they don't have knowledge like a human would.
Yeah, so they'll just vocalize their desires, right? Like a dog will just be like, play with me, play with me, play with me, or like give me food or something. It's like, okay, yeah, great. Like maybe you could talk to them a little bit, but not that useful. I mean, obviously there would be intelligent animals that would be very useful to talk to, right? Like corvids come to mind, which is to say, I'm being fanciful again. Ravens and crows. Like those are like genuinely like human level intellect, at least like child level intellect. Now, whether they would communicate as complicatedly is another question, but I do think those you could have conversations with. And obviously they have literal eyes in the sky, right? So if you are on good terms with them, like that would actually be useful. But I think it's still very limited. I mean, at that point, just make friends with pilots, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. You use satellites or something. I mean, dolphins tend to be intellectual to a certain extent from what we know. So you might get a little bit out of that.
They seem to be the closest to humans in terms of their communication as well. But again, it's like, for most animals, there isn't even that much of an upside of being able to talk to them. Right? Like, sure, it would be nice to have the ability, and if there was no strings attached, I would take it. But but there's like fairly limited upside, and the downside of not being able to talk to humans is obviously a very major one.
Oh yeah, and I believe communication with other humans is one of the biggest factors in preventing dementia. So if you were to lose all communication with humans, you're probably going to lose your mind fairly quickly after that.
Yes, and obviously that's not just for like the physical brain health, but also for like mental health reasons, right? Like social isolation is not great for people. And also, mind you, doesn't say you can't speak to humans, it says you can't communicate with humans, so that's actually much stricter than a lot of those things.
Absolutely.
So there aren't really any workarounds when it says communicate. Because the only thing I could think of for communicating with humans, if you can't, would have been to have a go-between, but the go-between would have to be an animal, because you can't communicate with humans, or a non-human animal to be precise. And so it's like, okay, I could like try to get a raven to spell something out, but like, again, if you play by Disney princess rules, maybe that works, but if in the real world, like, try to convince them to do something like very tedious, like on a somewhat consistent basis, is not going to work, right? You can only give them so many shiny things. So, yeah, I think this is actually, like, if you consider this realistically, it's terrible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 22% of people said yes, 78% said no. That is like the kind of numbers that we expect. But some people are always going to be contrarian here, either because they actually are, or because they're like trolling the website or whatever. Like they're like intentionally providing bad information, right? So like there's some degree that is always expected. I don't think I've ever seen something where it was literally like 0%. There might have been some single digits, but even that's, if I did see it, was definitely rare.
Always a contrarian somewhere.
Yeah. Which brings us to our final segment. Songs of the week. What is your song of the week?
Oh man, this time I picked Judas Priest, Painkiller. Quite possibly the greatest heavy metal song that ever existed, in my opinion.
I mean, for me, this song is not bad by any stretch, but it's also not great either to me. So this is, for me, that happens to me. Like, I said before I like metal, and to a degree that's true, but I think just saying that in a vacuum is maybe a bit misleading, because it turns out that my taste in metal is somewhat more selective. And this is one of those that's sort of on the edge there, right? Where, like, I don't dislike it by any stretch, but it's also not something I love, so it's fine, I guess.
Mm. This is, was at the very beginning. Oh, well, actually, I'd have to look it up. This may have been in the early 90s, but so it may not have actually been at the beginning of thrash metal, but Judas Priest was, of course, a part of the original metal scene with Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath and Motorhead and Rainbow and all those guys. But they made that transition into thrash metal, and you could have put them right along Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax and Slayer and Exodus and guys like that also, because they made that leap. They didn't just stay in the 70s. They kept progressing forward and forward, and you could definitely see it in this song right here.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great thing to do for the career, and obviously it's one of those things that was tricky to do, because you kind of don't want to like alienate your existing fans, but also you kind of want to grow your fans, and I do think some variety in musicians is generally a good thing. Now, whether or not I will end up liking the music, obviously, then ends up being a different story. But yeah, no, I mean, it's cool that they did that. But then obviously, I think the first list of bands you listed is definitely one that I associate myself more with than the second, right? So that's that thing. I mean, Metallica, yes, but also they have also a great variety of songs. But then otherwise, like I like some Motorhead songs. I like some Judas Priest. I like some Iron Maiden songs. Black Sabbath has a lot of good stuff. That is sort of, I mean, I guess that's where I said, like, this is the transition, and for me, I said this is sort of right on the edge of my taste, right? So, like, I can, like, it seems like they're transitioning away from my taste, right? So that.
Oh yeah, you like more of the traditional metal, yeah.
Yeah, like the older heavy metal, and like for newer stuff, mostly power metal, which I think is in a lot of ways very similar to the older heavy metal.
Oh, it is very much so. Yeah. Maybe add a little up tempo to original metal, and you have power metal.
Yeah, so that is sort of where my metal taste lies. For a while there, especially when I first started getting more into the metal side of things, I was like saying I'm a metal fan or something, and like honestly, when you tell that to people, most of the time the music they're going to recommend to you versus the music I actually like is not necessarily going to be in the same category. So, got to be a bit careful with that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I don't just like metal. I also like a lot of older, more classic stuff. I mean, I guess this is more classic, but like just like classic rock, traditional pop, and that brings us cleanly to my song of the week, which is "Sunglasses at Night" by Corey Hart.
Definitely a classic.
Yeah, it's a bit different from your song of the week choice, but
yeah, polar opposites even.
I mean, yeah, but people do say variety is the spice of life, and I do think there's something to be said for that, right? Where,
yeah.
I mean, I like this better than your song of the week, but your song of the week is something still close to something I would like, so that's.
I would hope you like your song of the week for sure.
I mean, every now and again,
you did not like.
Every now and again, you get in a situation where maybe it's like, oh yeah, this song is funny, but I wouldn't necessarily listen to it out, like just in general or something. Where it's like there's something about the song. We have had those before where someone is like, oh yeah, like this might not be something I would listen to every day, but it's kind of hilarious and you should listen to it or something like that. So yeah, no, I've had one of those as well, where it's like the comedy stuff especially comes to mind. But yeah, generally speaking, you should like a songs of the week. That's kind of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it brings.
We need to do a video for that song, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Because we've never done it before, and I would love to do a lyrical analysis on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's that deep, but also haven't looked at it that much. So.
Well, that's the question. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes you listen to a song and you're like, oh, this isn't very deep, and then you look into it and it's like, oh no, this is actually quite deep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hidden just beneath the surface.
Oh,
I guess hidden depths. That's basically what that means.
Yeah.
Which I guess brings this episode of the Trash Talk Podcast to a close. If you want to see more Smokey, links are in the description, both to the Trash Talks and to Beyond Football. And if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a like, and if you have something to say, leave a comment or join us. Our link is in the description below. Smokey?
That's it.
That's it.